Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the annual NWU lecture on academic freedom. Last year, it was an actual presentation. This year, it is online. So very similar, but totally different. Of course, a result of coronavirus. Before we begin, I would like to share some housekeeping rules. On your right-hand side of the screen, you will see a small green button. If you click on this, you will see the chat and QA function. We would like to engage with you and see your comments in the chat. If you've got a specific question, place it in the Q&A section, and as time allows, our guest speaker or any of the panel members will address the question. This is a fantastic function because it enables you as the audience to upvote more pertinent questions, so the popular questions are moved to the top of the screen. To enjoy optimal viewing during the presentation, you can click on the small box in the top right-hand corner. This will expand the presentations if you would like to view them more clearly. To get seated at a table, just double-click on any of the open seats. I think we should just briefly have a look at today's agenda, and that will be shared with you in a second. So what we see there is, after the short welcome, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning Professor Robert Balfour will set the scene, introduce the speaker, who is Dr. Saibold Noorda, President Observatory in Bologna. At 14:15, we'll start with the actual lecture entitled The Academic Freedom and Autonomy Challenge. After that, at 3 o'clock, panel discussion and Q&A involving Dr. Noorda, but also other members from within the university. And after that, 15:25, what we call a table discussion and panel comment. So the tables will have about 5 minutes each to discuss the questions: what is academic freedom and what is university autonomy? And after that, a spokesperson of each table or some of the tables will present the views of that table for not more than 1 minute. And after that, the panel, and specifically also Dr. Noorda, will make a few comments on the views of the audience. Now, I would like to welcome a few members of today's audience, especially also because they come from far away. We have Maida Hochevar, who is from Venezuela. I know her from previous work on academic freedom, and we know the plight of academics in Venezuela. We know the extent of government repression on the academic community there. We have a friend and colleague from Sweden, Anna Parkhouse. We've got a representative from the Scholars at Risk Network in New York, who also help scholars who face difficult situations in terms of academic freedom. And I even saw we have got a representative of the German Rectors Conference. I've not seen any representative from our South African equivalent, but perhaps next year then. We've got David Greenwood, who's also very much involved in promoting the cause of university and engaged in work on improving universities. And we've got the General Secretary of the Magna Carta Observatory in Bologna. Now, is an academic freedom lecture still relevant in a country such as South Africa? We do not have the kind of repression that you have, for example, in Venezuela. But let me tell you, there are academic freedom issues in South Africa and in many other democracies of the world. I would call these attacks academic freedom violations 2.0. They take the form of attacks on the one hand, in the form of financial attacks on the university communities. So in South Africa, for example, we see that both higher education and research, the public funding of both sectors is less than 1%, only 0.6% in each instance of the GDP. This is far below many of the other African countries and also the average of the OECD. This puts enormous pressures on universities, and these pressures are, of course, also felt by academics. Sometimes there are even direct attacks. So I always refer to the example of the infamous so-called list of accredited journals in which South Africans must publish if they want to get a state subsidy for their research. And we need that money for our research. And that list is highly problematic. It is arbitrary. In the field of law where I work, it excludes some of the most prestigious journals for which in a country like Australia you get the most marks. You know, the UNESCO recommendation of 1997 says that academics have the choice of the medium where they publish. On the other hand, we have what I would call managerial attacks. So they start in governments where we have a first round of bureaucracy and a second round of bureaucracy in universities. Having myself taught in Germany, the United Kingdom, and South Africa, I can say that South Africa is certainly the winner when it comes to bureaucracy. Let me just share 2 slides with you, and then we proceed with those who are important today and with our speaker. So I do have a slideshow of 2 slides, which I'll share with you if I do find it here. That one, sharing, and there we go. The Wellcome study of 2020, that is, Wellcome is an English NGO, asked 4,300 researchers from 87 countries. And just read the first sentence. 75% of academic staff believe that their work environment currently stifles creativity. Just think about that. And the second slide, I wish to show academic job satisfaction around the world. Just look at the third last line and the third last column on job satisfaction. For South Africa, you see 51.6%. Lower is just the UK, and also fairly low is Australia. So always those countries where new public management of science has gained a lot of ground. But this is the point where I will end, and where we now opportunity before we welcome our speaker, where I call on to stage the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning of Northwest University, Professor Robert Balfour. Hello, Professor Robert Balfour. It's your chance to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Am I audible, colleagues? Thank you. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Seibold Noorde to this very prestigious lecture. It's the second in our series of lectures on academic freedom as presented by the Northwest University. And I'm really delighted on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dan Hwadi, colleague DVC for Research and Innovation, Professor Frans Wanders, colleague DVCs and members of the management of the university to welcome you to this particular event. When our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Noorde, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Hwadi, instituted this particular lecture 2 years ago today, it was on the basis that he believed the university to be a place in which debates about freedom, the nature of freedom, and what academic autonomy means to be very important for the institution and its well-being. So the focus on autonomy and the university is an opposite one. And this is an annual lecture which we use to commemorate and indeed memorialize, if you like, the importance of the theme for the institution. And as Prof. Klaus alluded to, Dr. Noorde, we have in South Africa a nascent democracy in which the exercise of freedoms have to be realized, have to be acted on every day, freedoms to be realized and experienced. So I don't for one moment believe we can take our freedoms for granted, and our society is still vulnerable in many respects with the legacies, the long-lived legacies of apartheid, to make that we should focus consciously and conscientiously, mindfully on academic freedom and the autonomy of academics and the autonomy of institutions. So we're really very pleased that you could make time to be with us. Dr. Noorde, we are delighted to have somebody of your eminence with us. I'm sure colleagues will all have received the abstract for this afternoon's talk, so I'm not going to dwell on the abstract, but I would like to share something of Sybolt's very eminent background with us, because it links in many ways with the history of the Northwest University. Sybolt is currently the president of the Magna Carta Observatory in Bologna, but he was also the former president of the Dutch Association of Research Universities, as well as president emeritus of the University of Amsterdam. He received his formal education in the Netherlands and the USA, and he practiced and taught biblical studies, hermeneutics, and translation of the Bible. He was elected in 1983 as vice president of the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and we have many connections with the Vrije Universiteit. Dr. Noorde, I think we actually have an active MOU, an agreement with that university. So there are links between us in that respect. And of course, Dr. Noorde is a well-known expert on issues globally in higher education, and through his work with the Magna Carta Observatory, also very well known in terms of the governance issues for higher education institutions and the peculiar and sometimes strained relationships between institutions and organizations of government. So it's with that brief introduction that we welcome Dr. Noorde formally to this meeting. We look forward to a very stimulating discussion after the meeting, and I hope there will be a time for that to happen. But Dr. Noorde, I am again delighted to have you with us, and without any further words of welcome, over to you for the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, many thanks for the invitation to deliver this year's Academic Freedom Lecture, and my compliments to the university for a most valuable initiative. It is of key importance that each university cares about its foundational values and principles. In addition, it is an interesting coincidence that when I was a very junior researcher in the 70s at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, the first South African university I came to know at a distance was the Potchefstroom University, with which the Vrije Universiteit was closely related, and then in the mid-70s broke up because the apartheid issue separated us in those days. It was one of those occasions where we, graduate students and postgraduate students, young researchers, were putting pressure on our university leadership to take a firm stance anti-apartheid. So Potchefstroom was on the signs that we were carrying around when we were threatening to occupy the building of the leadership of the university. But that's all 45 years ago. Today, it is a great pleasure to be able to speak to you, although it's little bit of mixed feelings because I would have so much preferred to be able to be with you on campus in person and be learning firsthand about your academic community and its practices, its concerns, and its plans. But let's be glad that we have an alternative. And although it is a poor imitation of the real thing, we can at least communicate. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, from the kind introduction by Professor Balfour, you know I'm an associate of the Magna Carta Observatory at Bologna University, Italy, and its current president. As not all of you may be in the know about our organization and its aim, maybe a short explanation. Back in 1988, in view of the growing cooperation between nations and the role of universities in an increasingly international society, hundreds of then mainly European university leaders, by signing a joint declaration on fundamental principles of the university, wanted to demonstrate to themselves and to the outside world the core principles of what a university is and should be. Since 1988, this document, this Magna Carta Universitatum, has become part of the academic canon. It is frequently referred to as a standard expression of core academic values, autonomy and academic freedom in particular. Since 1988, close to 1,000 universities worldwide have become signatories of this declaration, among them 5 from the Republic of South Africa. And each year, new signatories are joining our worldwide community. And your university, Mr. Deputy Vice Chancellor, is very welcome to be one of these next year. As announced, I shall be speaking about the academic freedom and autonomy challenge. It may sound as if these values, academic freedom and autonomy of the university, are evident foundations of the university. Yet they do not go unchallenged. And exactly this is my topic for today's lecture. Over the years, we have learned that proclamation of freedoms is one thing. Living according to these proclaimed principles is quite another matter. This is because they are contextual to a high degree and challenged by changing circumstances. I see at least 3 major challenges before autonomous universities. They happen in diverse countries to a varying degree and in a variety of manifestations. The first of these challenges is surprisingly linked to the great success of universities. Precisely these successes of universities worldwide have been magnets for keen outside interest, easily leading to intense interference, regulating, steering from outside. How to remain free and independent under such influencing is not easy, above all because it's often tied up with funding priorities. A second serious challenge we are facing is the politically or ideologically motivated reining in of universities, their staff, their students, by governments and or other powerful authorities. Independent inquiry, autonomous prioritizing of study and research programs, and freedom in recruiting and appointing students and staff are then not wanted, but seen as disobedience to the ruling political class or ideological authority. A third major challenge is the erosion of support for autonomous universities and of trust in independent science and free scholarship. In societies that are highly fragmented, the classic concept of the common good has become obsolete. Universities there are easily seen as partisan institutions, serving only part of society, the corporate elites or the socio-cultural establishment of that particular society. And to be honest, to some degree, universities themselves contributed to this suspicion. It is my deep conviction that universities cannot and should not be passively undergoing societal and political weather change, but rather actively promote in-house awareness of these issues and engage in grassroots deliberations on how to best respond and cope. Joining forces and sharing best practices with colleagues, nationally as well as internationally, will no doubt invigorate such efforts. And together we should be standing up for the ideals and good practices of independence and academic freedom, not because they are prerogatives of selfish academic communities, but exactly because they are crucial prerequisites of universities serving the needs of the world around them. Now I shall be speaking about these challenges in some more detail and zoom in on the fundamental principles of academic freedom and university independence. First, on the academic freedom principle. It is worthwhile to read once more what the 1988 Magna Carta says about this. I quote, "Freedom in research and teaching is the fundamental principle of university life, and government and universities must ensure respect for this fundamental requirement. Rejection of intolerance, remaining always open to dialogue. A university is an ideal meeting ground for teachers capable of imparting their knowledge and well equipped to develop it by research and innovation, and for students entitled, able, and willing to enrich their minds with that knowledge." End of quote. By calling freedom in research and teaching the fundamental principle of university life, a clear norm and standard is set to the academic community. In line with this focus on the university as a community, the Magna Carta goes on to describe the university as an ideal meeting ground for teachers and for students. They are the beneficiaries of this freedom and the actors who actually do the meeting and interacting in university. The Magna Carta is not presenting and subscribing to freedom as the fundamental principle of university life from the point of view of very individual privilege, but rather in terms of academic community culture. Exactly because of its commitment to freedom, rejection of intolerance, and openness to dialogue, a university is then an ideal meeting ground for qualified teachers and students, and should have the means ready to preserve and protect this freedom for all its members. All of this is much easier said than done. Making university life indeed free, tolerant, open, requires the development and good maintenance of comprehensive cultures, of behaviors, rather than setting rules and announcing regulations alone. Living such values is more than reciting the book. It requires a true community engagement. And over the years, it has become clear that it's quite a challenge to actually live and maintain the freedom, openness, and tolerance that should be characteristic of university life. Success cannot be taken for granted, at home as well as abroad, and in international collaborations. This is about the realization of a crucial openness to different opinions, positions you may not agree with, positions you may not like, an openness to debate, an openness to solid arguments, both in the domain of scholarship as well as in the societal context universities are part of. Universities, in this way of thinking, ought to be lighthouses and examples of this kind of tolerance, of this kind of attitude and arrangements, leading the way for society. And if universities fail to realize the ideal of freedom and tolerance inside their walls, they are not only limiting the creative potential of their community of scholars and students, but they also fail to function as a good model to the outside world. At the time of the 1988 Magna Carta, almost all of us looked at the international scene as the main theater of academic freedom. Increasing international mobility and collaboration were expected to nurture freedom and tolerance and heighten a sense of shared ideals and practices among colleagues in countries that until very recently had been much more unfree. Since then, we have witnessed a substantial political climate change, both globally as well as in many national arenas. For individual universities, this turn of events meant that they were facing new challenges and new types of actions and resistance. Some years ago, President Zimmer of the University of Chicago in the United States aptly described the situation in the following way. I quote, "Invited speakers are disinvited because a segment of a university community deems them offensive, while other orators are shouted down for similar reasons. Demands are made to eliminate readings that might make some students uncomfortable. Individuals are forced to apologize for expressing views that conflict with prevailing perceptions. And in many cases, these efforts have been supported by university administrators." End of quote. The challenge, how under the present circumstances to enact the principle of freedom, openness, and tolerance as a key trait of university life, has indeed become a pressing one indeed. Maybe most university leaders would subscribe to President Zimmer's statement when he said, "Universities cannot be viewed as a sanctuary for comfort, but rather as a crucible for confronting ideas and thereby learning to make informed judgments in complex environments. Having one's assumptions challenged and experiencing the discomfort that sometimes accompanies this process are intrinsic parts of an excellent education. Only then will students develop the skills necessary to build their own futures and contribute to complex society." End of quote. In reality, however, many of us fail to make these ideals a reality in their own institution. A second main challenge of academic freedom and tolerance that I observe is immediately connected to this first one. The university often is, or has become in many places, rather a souk with a host of individual shopkeepers or a sports ground for individual career competitions than a collaborative community with shared ideals and joint values. If I am observing correctly, it would be a number one priority to seriously work on this, to create or recreate academic communities where basic values are being discussed and shared, and not just solemnly remembered and declared on festive occasions, or used as a license to individual self-promotion. University leadership must explore ways to, at the same time, foster individual creativity and choice, as build and maintain the fellowship or guild of scholars and students, not only in scholarly terms, but in terms of civic responsibilities as well. In my perception, many of us are guilty of a good degree of neglect here. In line with a broader social development of individualism, which in academic life has been strongly promoted by competition and contest, we have witnessed a considerable fragmentation of the university community in many places. And we have been given priority to community building and the design and development of joint values and shared ideals. The recent Living Values project of the Magna Carta Observatory has been designed to help universities to do exactly this. Try to detect, define, and enact upon joint values and shared ideals. A freedom of research and teaching, dialogue, openness, and tolerance are to be the hallmarks of our universities. We better make these our priorities and work collectively hard towards these ideals, to the benefits of the individual as well as the community. I now turn to the other fundamental principle, and I quote again a passage from the original Magna Carta of 1988. The university, it says, is an autonomous institution at the heart of societies, differently organized because of geography and historical heritage. It produces, examines, appraises, and hands down culture by research and teaching. And to meet the needs of the world around it, mark this phrase, to meet the needs of the world around it, its research and teaching must be morally and intellectually independent of all political authority and economic power. The drafters of the original Magna Carta refrained from making unilateral complacent statements of the independent university, but rather made it crystal clear from the start that universities are embedded institutions. They exist in a social setting at the heart of societies, and their autonomy, their independence, is to be to the benefit of that particular environment. The universities must be independent for a purpose, in order to enable it to do what it is supposed to be doing, and in order to best serve those whom it is supposed to be serving. Research and teaching should be morally and intellectually independent, and universities should be autonomous to be able to do their job well, to do what they are good at. And it's equally important that universities understand what they are good for, as universities do not exist for themselves. Autonomy is a crucial condition for success in scholarly research, for critical quality in teaching and learning, as well as for unfettered defining of the institutional mission and academic hiring criteria. And successful research, high quality teaching and learning, as well as well-functioning academic institutions, that's exactly what societies may expect from universities. Autonomy, literally the right to self-rule, doesn't come by itself. It doesn't fall from heaven. It must be granted. In an ideal world, legal provisions allow universities the freedom to act independently when organizing their institutions, hiring their fellows, and designing their programs. Sufficient generic funding ideally allows them to do what they are good at and to set their own spending preferences. Yet, exactly these legal frameworks and these funding arrangements are subject to political preferences and societal demand and pressure, not just in general, but very concretely. And over time, and for all sorts of reasons, the terms of that fine contract between university and society, you get your independence and you serve as well, are being reinterpreted and reapplied. And it seems the social contract between university and society reflects a very dynamic relationship, bringing change and ever new challenges for better and for worse. And about one particular challenge I shall now speak at some more detail. It is about autonomy in times of nationalist revivals. In view of the positive internationalist climate at the end of the 1980s, the first principle of the Magna Carta Universitatem of autonomy unquestionably expressed the conviction and the expectation that worldwide independent university would be and should become forces of social progress and development. And to a large extent, this expectation has indeed come true. Towards the end of the last millennium, and in the first decade of the new, immense progress has been made, not only in terms of university growth, but also in regard to their impact to societies. In very many places around the globe, universities used their independent powers to contribute to the development of societies. Yet with these successes, new challenges came along. As I said before, success attracts attention and invites demand. A growing number of potential beneficiaries, be they representatives of government, international businesses, local or regional stakeholders or students and their families, a growing number of potential beneficiaries knocked on the door and voiced their requests, not seldom in opposition to each other. Since those years, such challenges have multiplied. If institutions of higher education and research thought their position in society to be stable and sustainable, recent developments in the European higher education area and in the Americas have been a wake-up call, loud and clear. The United Kingdom's decision to separate itself from the European Union, the emergence of new-style American politics, that's a euphemism, since 2016, and Jair Bolsonaro's election as president of Brazil are quite prominent incidents of political weather change. They will most probably for many years perturb the academic status quo in the countries concerned. Yet they are not alone. Changing government policies in Hungary, Turkey, and Venezuela are already jeopardizing university freedoms to a degree that until very recently was beyond plausibility. And your own continent of Africa sadly offers numerous, often bloody examples of a similar trend. A stark focus on national interests is the common denominator and the main driving force of these political power changes. Nations feel they must reposition themselves in the international arena, and their leaders rather prefer the confrontational to the collaborative mode, erecting walls rather than building bridges. And precisely this core characteristic explains why universities are suffering the negative impact of political adoption of this new style of nationalism. It should, however, not be overlooked that nationalist revivals, as a rule, enjoy strong support by the electorate, which clearly echoes disillusion and a sense of being left behind that reside with many in society. Others may have prospered in times of globalization, open economies and open borders. But many have seen no benefits and feel threatened. To them, it is about time for a change, a new rule that will honor and protect the people that have been left out of the equation. What message does all of this send to universities? How do they respond? Concerned about the consequences for existing arrangements of international collaboration? Apprehensive that they might be deprived of major funding options? Afraid for loss of market power in domains like student mobility, research talent acquisition? Such worries are quite understandable, yet they often lead to defensive responses, to efforts to maintain existing positions of privilege and rank. I would like to suggest a somewhat deeper rethinking of the mission of universities and a good use of their independence. The traditional narrative about higher education, widening access, opens up a bright future both for the individual and for the community. That traditional narrative has already lost much of its strength. If you see the inequalities in the labor market, if you see the fragmentation in society, the promise of a good job after graduation isn't at all true for all. The widely acclaimed worldwide success of scientific research also has its flip side. International journals favor international themes and topics. Worldwide rankings measure accomplishments that are visible and measurable on worldwide scales, rather than a research agenda that is driven by national, regional, and metropolitan agendas. Global competition easily drives out local engagement and logically favors technology and the natural sciences over social sciences and humanities. In the wake of all of this, shouldn't universities seriously reconsider their research agenda and seek to rebalance them and reframe their mission in teaching and learning, rather than following the so-called example of a world-class university? The success of mass higher education is not the success of all participants and of all of society. Its benefits are very unevenly distributed and thus contributing to basic inequalities in society. And similarly, the leading university model, as it is reflected by international rankings, is not the model of preference for all of society, because social engagement as a research priority and honoring deep diversity of cultural background, social status, and early schooling and teaching and learning are being overshadowed by striving towards research excellence and relying on the mechanics of individual careerism. As a consequence, higher education in many countries has been promoting inequality and forgotten basic equity. It should not come as a surprise that support for higher education mainly comes from those who expect to benefit from it, while large segments of the general public may have lost trust, and we in higher education are still mesmerized by decades of growth and success. New style nationalist policies with their populist flavors are no doubt posing serious threats to higher education and research systems, menaces that shouldn't be underestimated. At the same time, I'm convinced they also sound wake-up calls and offer compelling reasons to rethink the social contract underlying higher education, the values driving individual institutions and the priorities of their agendas. The ambition of the first principle of the Magna Carta universities, that universities meet the needs of the world by research and teaching morally and intellectually independent of all political authority and economic power, doesn't work by itself. It sets a daunting task a daunting task that requires considerable courage and commitment. And over the last decades, experience has shown that universities not always, to say the least, work up the courage to perform up to that task. I'm reaching my final paragraph. Since 1988, the story of the university hasn't been about growth and successes alone. High levels of political and societal turbulence and new international dynamics have been shaping and reshaping the social contracts on which universities depend. Universities are struggling to remain open spaces of dialogue and tolerance. Individualism and careerism are jeopardizing its community quality. Finding and maintaining joint values and shared ideals isn't simple in many places. At the same time, societal developments of fragmentation, growing inequality, political climate change in terms of nationalist revivals and populist claims have entered the scene and have been editing and updating quite a few sustainable development goals. Identity fragmentation, erosion of trust in independent institutions and expertise, and a clear decline of positive impact of education on the well-being of all must clearly be added to the list of grand challenges human civilization is now facing. And at the end of the day, universities will have to demonstrate their positive contribution to society at large, or else they will see their position of trust and reliability erode. All these developments made us at the Magna Carta Observatory discuss the need for rethinking and maybe restating the fundamental principles of what a university should be and do. Over and over again, we have noted that the original Magna Carta of 1988 is and remains a great and strong declaration. What we frequently did hear, however, was the need to say more, to go beyond stating a small number of fundamental principles, and distinctly and explicitly address contemporary challenges and express the responsiveness of the signatory universities in their ethics, as well as their key commitments and engagements. Meanwhile, a process of drafting and consultation has now produced a new Magna Carta Universitat 2020. It was to be launched in Bologna at the 2020 anniversary of the original declaration later this month of September. For obvious reasons, we have had to postpone this event to next year, to June 2021, hoping that by then international in-person conferences will be feasible. Yet the new statement is there. The new draft Magna Carta Universitatum, which you can find on our website, removes nothing from the original, the fundamental values universities signed up to since 1988. It strives to be responsive to and resonate with contemporary challenges and concerns. Its tone recognizes that the pursuit of the fundamental values has worth along with their actual attainment, which in practice is a constant quest. It recognizes the more global nature of what universities do and the wider range of local responsibilities which they have. I quote a passage from the new statement to this effect. The principles laid out in the Magna Carta Universitatum are as valid today as they were in 1988, and they are the necessary precondition for human advancement through inquiry, analysis, and sound action. The dramatic changes outlined above require the Global Academy to identify responsibilities and commitments that the signatories agree are vital to universities around the world in the 21st century. And that's the reason for this new declaration. I would like to invite you to have a close look at that new text yourselves at a later point of time. I shall now only quote a few passages that illustrate the nature of the commitments of the new statement. Universities acknowledge that they have, I quote, a responsibility to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world and to the communities they serve, to benefit humanity and contribute to sustainability. And further down it says, universities have a civic role and responsibility. They are part of global collegial networks of scientific inquiry and scholarship. They are building on shared bodies of knowledge and contributing to their further developments. But they are also embedded in local cultures and crucial relevant to their future and enrichment. While they are immersed in and connected with global developments, they engage fully with and assume leading roles in local communities and ecosystems. And in another passage it says, universities are non-discriminatory spaces of tolerance and respect, where diversity of perspectives flourishes, and where inclusivity, anchored in principles of equity and fairness, prevails. They, universities, therefore commit themselves to advance equity and fairness in all aspects of academic life, including admissions, hiring, and promotion practices. One last quote from this new statement. Universities acknowledge that individuals and communities, often due to inequitable circumstances, have difficulty gaining access to higher education or influencing the modes and matter of academic study. To realize human potential everywhere, universities deliberately seek ways to welcome and engage with diverse voices and perspectives. I conclude. A colleague of mine some years ago lamented the absence of any agreement or even debate on the broader public responsibility of universities, beyond the production of graduates, the provision of limited professional services, and the pursuit of knowledge. This silence, he said, has led to an erosion of institutional integrity in some places, and more in general to a loss of public credibility. Against the backdrop of this trend, he said that universities can exert civic influence only if they themselves are seen as models of civic responsibility, and asked if universities wouldn't do well to articulate their core values and encourage a renewed professional commitment that recognizes that these values are embedded in the university's larger social purpose and obligation. Precisely because the positive role and purpose of higher education in contemporary society may not be acknowledged by all higher education institutions, and their national and international friends and partners should join forces. Over the past 30 years, individual universities and national and international associations have been quite successful in setting common goals for high quality teaching and research and developing joint ventures of all sorts. It would be great if such collaborations were continued and also keenly directed to the university's larger social purpose and obligation. It would most certainly reinforce the place of universities in society. And even more importantly, it would reinforce the good use of education and research for health, prosperity, and enlightenment around the world. if that were the results of a good use of academic freedom and independence of universities, we have reasons to be content. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you very much, Sybald, for a thought-provoking speech. And I think this has given us quite some thought for the further discussion. And I'll now actually call onto stage members of the panel with questions, but there are also very interesting questions in the Q&A that we will attend to. So let's first of all call onto stage Dr. Alison Geduld. Let me say that Dr. Geduld obtained her doctorate recently with a PhD entitled Ubuntu as a Constitutional Value, a Social Justice Perspective. So very pertinent to the South African situation. I welcome Dr. Anne-Margriet de Wet from the Faculty of Education. She is the co-author of on education, book on education law in South Africa. And then we do have Mr. Gideon Rousseau, an expert on competition law from the Mafeking campus, and he's always for me like a prototype of the intellectual. So when he teaches as a guest lecturer in my class, he comes with Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and reads from that to the students, something that students are probably not used to anymore these days. And yeah, our further member of the panel, Mr. Nyako Raboshaka, has internet connectivity issues. He's in Limpopo, so he can't join this panel. If Prof. Robert would like to join, he is more than welcome to do so. While that might be happening, I'll just use the occasion, and while the other members of the panel get settled, let me just refer to one of the questions that we have in the Q&A. So David asks, I'll just read exactly what he says. If the significant intellectual, social, political, and environmental problems are system problems, multidimensional and messy, then the Fordist model of universities as silos is the opposite. So I think very much we do see the Fordist model in operation, and Sybald, I'll just stick with first names for the panel. You might know the book by Frank Corredi, Where Have All the Intellectuals Gone? And where he says that people with genuine learning have disappeared, and what we see in universities these days has been described by John Smith in The Toxic University as so-called academic rock stars. So people who are perhaps rather technocrats who get to the top, and the intellectuals are not heard anymore. Do you see such a problem? Where's the root for that problem? Is it the university, or is it perhaps at state level? Jill Blackmore has said that universities these days have become the extended arm of national economic policy. Is that perhaps the reason? Can Sybald hear us?
I was just trying to unmute myself.
Okay, there we go.
Make myself a speaker again. Well, I think these are very, very good points, and in a way, everything hangs together. There is a strong dependence of a government influence, a business-like structure, but there is also within the universities a tendency to live and enjoy silos. I have seen in my own university the great changes that come about when you start to work in a truly interdisciplinary fashion. When you have groups, workshops, institutes working across disciplinary boundaries and addressing the issues and the challenges of society the way they present themselves in society, and not the way you like to talk about them in your law faculty, in your faculty of economics, or in your faculty of sociology. Reality is not nicely divided in faculties. Reality is complexity. And if in a university we make a bad use of our disciplinary knowledge and our disciplinary methods by segmenting problems according to our disciplines, we are to lose contact with society and lose an eye for complexity. So my ideal university of today is a university like the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi was invented some 50 years ago, a university that is interdisciplinary by nature and that is devoted and defined by complexity rather than by neatly defined disciplines.
Okay, that is an interesting take on the matter. I think someone who's also thought a lot about the environment that, for example, also we in South Africa work in, a very structured environment is Gideon. I think you have got strong views on the micromanagement that we see in universities, perhaps as the actual problem, or do you see it at your level? What you formulated a question in this regard, haven't you?
Well, in a sense, I think there are a whole range of issues, and at one point, I think that the corporate managerialism that has emanated from Europe in the past 30 years has made it to our shores, not to the same extent. So there's immense pressure on us to commodify education. And I think this whole model that students are customers and that they come to us with customer demands, and we are now in the marketplace for selling education, I think that is the one issue that is seriously impacting on academic freedom. It's not so bad in South Africa yet, but certainly in America and in the United Kingdom, people have 9-month contracts, people who are no security of tenure. And I think that really undermines academic freedom if people are always insecure and have no benefits and have no pension funds. So that is the one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is, of course, that maybe universities have in the past been overprivileged. So I think if you go back to the 20th century, there was this division between high culture and low culture. And academics were the high priests, and I say priests specifically because mostly were men, were the high priests of a secular culture. And there was a certain privilege in then being the arbiters of knowledge and culture, and that maybe that was entrenching power. So it may be useful that level of power is challenged. But yeah, there are consequences then through the change of what is knowledge. And I think we've seen through digitalization how what knowledge is and what is truth. Those debates have become very, very fragmented, and universities are not able to react to it.
Gideon, if I may interrupt there, and maybe you may also pose this as a question to Dr. Noorda, to touch on the issue of competition in universities. And I think also, Anna-Marie, you had ideas about the competition that we have in universities. How would you pose a question in this regard to Zybold?
Me or Gideon?
Anna-Marie, go on.
Okay. For me, I feel that the academia has become extremely competitive and it's very performance driven. So the activities that might promote academic freedom, talking, discussions, thinking, attending lectures and stuff, are not favored. What is favored are those activities that directly generate income or directly generate output. So that also contributes to the competitiveness, together with financial constraints, because now we also compete for finance, we compete with other universities, we compete in so many regards. And Sybil, you also touched on this. I think what we need to discuss, or what I would like us to discuss on, and I would like to get your ideas on this, is how do we move away from this competitiveness? Because this is the environment we are in already. How do we fix it?
Well, two things. First of all, it's my belief and my hope that by identifying the core values, the core principles of a university, we get to the heart of the matter. And we will find that if you must use your qualities, your academic freedom, your independence to serve society and to fight inequalities and be fair and constructive to all of society, it cannot easily be translated in business terms of making most profits and getting the highest number of international awards. I remember a workshop a couple of years ago in Kaapstad, organized by Sarua together with us, where we are exactly discussing this. And we said, what is the role of international rankings measuring dimensions that are not relevant to a local setting of a university or a regional setting of a university at all? So getting back to the core values and the core responsibilities of a university to serve your society, not only your students, but your society at home, in your region, in your country, in the first place, will maybe help us leave that track of economically calculable results and competitive elements. So it's our hope that discussions on value and basic principles may help us as a community to find another road. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen the university move from an elite institution that was small and unknown to most people to a very successful and widely acclaimed institution. But with that success of the university and that opening of the university, we also seem to have lost some of the heart of the matter, some of our original senses of responsibility and our dedication to fairness and equity.
As we are speaking about foundational values and the Magna Carta, the revised version, so I've got saying somebody's actually taken the time to read through the text while online, saying the new text in the Magna Carta seems to be more explicit on the responsibilities and engagement of universities, which is to be commended. Asking how much debate over these aspects of the text there have been. Before allowing Sybil to respond, I may just say I know that there was a very wide circulation of the text and to comment on, and I remember that I myself made a comment, and I think there was changes to the final text. I think a previous version of the text referred to the fact that universities must react to the exigencies in society. I don't know how exactly it was framed, and I was afraid that this might perhaps actually be kind of an attack of governments on universities. You know, the external pressure is to say, we are paying taxpayers' money, so you must deliver the outcome. But maybe, Sybil, you can tell us a bit about the drafting of the Magna Carta. Sybil is... Yes.
Well, just by way of anecdote, the 1988 Magna Carta was drafted by 8 rectors and former rectors of European universities, all of them in their 60s, and all of them of the same gender. Guess which? This new one was also drafted by a committee of 8. I was by far the oldest member, and the youngest member was a student from Brazil. We were 4 men and 4 women. We were representing all continents and all sorts of different biographies and backgrounds. And I think this is one of the main explanations why we came up with a text that is much more explicit on civic responsibilities and much more explicit on what the responsible role of a university entails. But of course, a drafting committee is not an authority that just broadcasts a new text into the world. From the feedback we received after we distributed the draft and the feedback we got at consultation sessions that we had over the past 2 years, we have learned that this is really supported in our community. And I add in our community, because we all know there are different types of universities in the world. I mean, a large part of universities worldwide are commercial institutions, full stop. They are driven by commercial interests. And we want to be a group of universities that is driven by social responsibility and academic honesty and integrity. So we profess to be a special kind of universities. We are under no illusion that we represent all universities or at any time will represent all universities. We rather be true to our story and to our beliefs than try to have everyone in our bag. But
I remember.
If you would want to define the difference between the original 1988 Magna Carta and this one, it is that the new one repeats the fundamental values of the first one, and it adds a couple of very precisely detailed responsibilities universities feel for fair education, equality in society, and so on and so on.
I'm glad that the Magna Carta retains the old part, because obviously there's a lot of pressure these days to strengthen perhaps university autonomy at the expense of the freedom of the individual in universities. But let me not speak further and rather ask Alison, because I remember that one of the values that was also decisive in at least the University Values Project was the value of diversity. Maybe, Alison, do you have a question that is related to that? I could imagine so.
Well, not related to diversity, but I think related to the whole concept of, I see in the Q&A, people are talking about academic freedom versus academic responsibility, and so forth. I think I will comment on that. At the conceptual level, I think, first of all, I mean, this debate has been really stimulating, but I think at a conceptual level, I think we usually think of freedom as this very great thing. But what came to mind immediately when I started thinking of academic freedom was, the text by the social contract text by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, where he says that man is born free in every way he is in chains. So, we sort of think freedom good, unfreedom bad, but perhaps we should start thinking about what are our unfreedoms, what are the things that we commit ourselves to, if we can think of, values in that regard. And So I think maybe at a conceptual level, there's also this tendency to think about academic freedom as something that's uber relative, which kind of leads to the idea that anything goes, which it obviously is not, because it we are supposed to pursue very specific responsibilities and ideals. So maybe we can rather speak of academic responsibility rather than academic freedom. I don't know. I think the word academic freedom is seems to be a bit problematic in that regard. And then just want to put this in as well. You know, as we were talking about the Magna Carta as a European creation. I mean, if we think about universities, not just African and South African universities, but universities nowadays have also been encumbered with thinking about the decolonization of knowledge. So I'm also wondering about whether the creation of these principles by a European institution, whether that has relevance for us as South African universities who struggle with issues of access, with issues of inequality, and well, our particular history that we've mentioned already. So I think at that point, I'll just say that.
Zybold, there's a lot of questions relating to whether academic freedom is the proper concept to use. That we should speak of academic I've views on this, but I'll ask Zybold to comment on that, and also on the question to, of course, I know the whole history of Magna Carta Universitatum, and it is, of course, a document which is relevant now for all universities, but let Zybold comment on that as well.
Thank you, Klaus. Well, with reference to the remarks of Alison Geduld, I would like to say that one of the main reasons why we wanted to have a new declaration based on a worldwide consultation and supported by a wider group than the group that did their job in the 80s, was that we want to be a global community of universities, and because we are to a growing sense active in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in all sorts of places, we are also confronted with situations that were not like the situation, the challenges of the 80s in Europe that produced the first Magna Carta. So we hope the new one is reflecting, to the extent this is of course possible because the world is a very diverse place, but it is reflecting a much wider picture of the world in a much fairer way than the first one did. And secondly, as to the term academic freedom, I mean, I'm part of endless discussions, and I speak a lot and I discuss a lot about academic freedom. And my basic rule always is, let's not talk about freedom without talking about the use of that freedom. Let's always speak about two words. Let's speak about freedom to what end, how to use it. And if I'm in a discussion where academic freedom or institutional autonomy is just a self-serving ideal, I feel distrust come up. If an autonomous university is there to allow the rector of that university to be an authoritarian leader of that university, I wouldn't vote for that autonomous university. I'd rather have a not autonomous university. So the use of freedom and the use of autonomy is important. And that's exactly why this afternoon I referred a lot to the challenges we are facing and the choices we have to make. And they are not easy choices. They are not easy options. They require lots of debate. And in many places, They will also lead to tension within the academic community because people don't easily agree on this. But if we want to find a way out from a state-led system or a economically led system or an authoritarian system into the academic community of the 21st century, we have to engage in that kind of debate and not be afraid of it. It takes courage, but where it's been done, it appears to be a very rewarding experience.
I think I should refer to some more of the comments and questions of the audience. Just one comment that I'm going to out here. I'm going to go through three of them. Vian says, I think that one of the major problems is that we have moved away from universities being places of a life of the mind to a measurable sweat of the brow institution. Okay, we can take note of that. Another question is, what do we mean by university leaders responsible for creating an institutional value-based culture? Should we not look at mid-level leaders much more, such as the deans, for example? And there was one question that actually had quite a number of clicks, so I should ask it. Is there something such as absolute academic freedom in certain instances uncontaminated by any interference from outside?
Well, I mean, to the matter of university leadership and a value-based culture, it is absolutely clear that you can only have a community that is working with joint values if you do it grassroots style. And this is not something that you can sort of impose on a university and say, well, from next Monday on, you be a shared value community. This doesn't work. So the process of discussing and working towards a value-based institution, like we do in our Living Values project, is a process that is grassroots involvement style. As to a pure and undeleted academic freedom of autonomies, there's no such thing. As I said at several occasions in my talk, there is always an embedding of the institution. Authority of the university, the self-rule of a university is never an unrestricted one. It's always dependent on forces inside and outside the institution. Same thing with academic freedom. It's the same discussion about individual academic freedom and institutional academic freedom. University is not a place where individuals set the rules and individuals are making all the programs and are enjoying a borderless amount of autonomy. That's a fantasy figure. We are all social animals in an institution as a university, just as is society. So if we talk about freedom, it's always relative, and we always must be ready to engage in debate and find a good balance. Same thing with academic freedom, the same thing with institutional autonomy.
We actually have approached... Yeah, Gideon, make a comment.
In a sense, I was very glad that Professor Noorda raised the nationalist revival, because in a sense, the challenges of our time come through identity politics. Now that I'm not opposed to it in principle, because I think there are benefits in hearing voices from Black Lives Matter, Rhodes Must Fall, and trans community, and so on. But the difficulty with identity politics, particularly in the age of nationalism, is that freedom is then also a license for voices of populism and of destruction of that kind. So how does one manage that within the debate around freedom, where not all voices are in fact building the community? How does one manage that process around freedom?
Well, Gideon, this is exactly one of the reasons why I hate it that I'm not with you in South Africa, that we don't have the time to spend an evening at dinner and tomorrow morning at a workshop to discuss these issues. This is not the kind of thing for easy answers. There's no easy way out. If all of us, if all groups in society are just trying to maximize their individual freedoms and all protection for their individual interests, society will be killed. To have a fair and open democratic society means that we have to be willing to engage in a balancing act. And that balancing act is often painful, but it cannot be avoided. And no one, even a person and a group with the rightest cause, can try to manipulate and monopolize societies. This is true of the United States, this is true of Germany, this is true of South Africa, of Brazil, of any country in the world. So the struggle towards fair and open societies is not an easy one, but it must be fought and it must be discussed, and universities, it is my belief, should be lighthouses leading the way there. It should try to do that exercise themselves in-house rather than avoid it and because it's uneasy or because they pretend a university should be a place of comfort rather than of courage.
At that point, unfortunately, I'm just going to quickly read 3 questions, but we are not going to answer them now because we go into the discussion mode. But we might come back after that because we still have a panel of 10 minutes towards the end. There's a question here: how do we restore the prestige of scholarship without maintaining the elitist narrative? We've got a question from Mayra from Venezuela asking about the role of universities in transitional justice, if there are examples of that. And we had a question about an African version of the Magna Carta. I was just about to nudge my university to sign the one in Bologna, but I mean, maybe there's room for something that concretizes the document for our purposes, retains the values, but perhaps concretizes them. But we'll get back to that later. So what we're going to do now is everybody returns to their tables, and we'll have 5 minutes where you can ponder the question: what does academic freedom and what does university autonomy mean to you? Discuss it for 5 minutes at your tables. Select a spokesperson who subsequently will, for 1 minute, tell us the views of that table. We might not have time for every table to share views, but towards the end then, once the tables have presented their views, the panel, and specifically also Seibold, might comment on some of the views that we've heard.
You find very soon the need for protection. The protection for students to have opinions that may not be shared by the majority of their peers. The opinions and programs of a colleague in research that may be different from the mainstream. A position of a university that may not be aligned with most of the universities in the country. To live with differences, to live with diversity, and to protect diversity seems to be a virtue that we have to really learn. To not make safety because of uniformity, but find safety in diversity. And that seems to be something that a university should try to bring about. So protection in that sense, I would like to underline.
Thank you, Seibold. Of course, there's still many questions in the chat, the Q&A. We won't get to answering them. I think perhaps just a final last question, a short question by each panelist. And while you start thinking about the question, I'd just like to convey greetings to Seibold from Chris Brunt, who's in Cape Town at the moment, but is experiencing load shedding. And I may tell the audience that Chris Brunt has written a fantastic book which deals with the whole thing of ranking in universities. Yes, so I could recommend that to everybody. Questions? Let's start with Alison.
Okay, I think I'll make it very brief. I think one of the things that came up a lot was the influence and power that government, in terms of the finances, subsidies and so forth, the influence that the government has on universities. And Dr. Noorda, in your presentation, you spoke a lot about the liberations that we as staff of university, that faculty has to have, that university has to have in terms of academic freedom. But I'm wondering about the power that universities and faculty actually have. If we are facing a structural problem, is that not where it has to change? And what can we do as faculty to bring about that meaningful change? I'm wondering whether deliberations is sufficient.
Okay, let's perhaps first have Anna Magriet's question.
Mine is more a comment that links up with what Alison just said. When we speak of values and the values that should drive our endeavors and activities and the choices we make in terms of our academic activities, we are faced with practicalities such as a shortage of time and money and other resources that we need. I think to agree with Alison that there's a structural problem and we have to have these discussions and deliberate, but we need some kind of a practical way forward. What can we as academia do to change or to at least start structure that currently negatively affects academic freedom and even our living out of the academic responsibilities that.
Okay. Gideon?
At the top of the comment, Mrs. Thatcher famously said there is no society. And then Vice-Chancellor of the English University said some time ago, his job is only logos and league tables. So we are driven into the market. And I think that it will be, and South Africa follows European and international trends fairly quickly. So as South Africans, we need to be conscious of the threats of the market order on the university. And then a question is then, in a sense, pandemics always change power relations. And the financial crises that universities will face, both private and public, because of the pandemic and the shifting in power relations. I mean, a lot of people are furloughed or are being retrenched, so that the power will in fact shift into the hands of management in a crisis, because this is what pandemics do. So how are we going to protect academic freedom in this era of crisis?
Seibold, you've got an opportunity to make a final statement to our audience.
Well, I mean, the themes that have been just named are justifying another lecture. These things are very complex. You could say a crisis makes people turn to their basic values. You could also say a crisis creates thieves, people who use the occasion for their own benefits. And both statements are true. So I wrote an article on higher education and the present pandemic a couple of months ago. And my statement there was that if universities are to reinvent and reset some of their operations because of the pandemic, they should make sure that they work on the basis of their key values, their social responsibility, rather than their selfish interests. The remarks that Alison made on the power of the staff, it's my personal experience that we are constantly, as university people, as university community, underestimating our powers. Maybe we are so used to not causing trouble and obey the rules that we forget about this. I've seen examples, both rather militant examples and very peaceful examples, where universities are pretty well turned around because a united staff movement said we can't go on the way we do. And in a way, the project that I referred to in my talk, the Living Values Project of the Magna Carta, is an invitation for universities to do a grassroots style exercise on what is driving the university and what should be driving the university. And that should, in my way of seeing it, it should be an exercise that is involving all and everyone. And I've seen examples in very many different countries where it works that way, where suddenly the president of the university is just one person at a table, and where 5 students have the lead, and where the result of that whole movement is a reinforcement of that sense that we are a joint and academic community with shared values. But again, I realize these are just very short sentences and not able to convey a whole message. So my hope is, and let that be my last statement, that you will continue to do these kinds of discussions and take your freedoms in your own hands and use them well.
Thank you, Seibold. I think that is a theme that also speaks a lot about academic discourse being the most important thing about universities, rather than the delivery of any external products to society. The discourse that we have, that is a contribution in itself. I think we've done something wrong that we are on time. Yes, we are on time. I think if this would have been a live event, it would have gone over time, but the opportunity for that might arise at some point. First of all, let me thank the panelists, Alison, Anna Margriet, and Gideon, for doing this important job. I know you are provocative minds. It is nice that you joined us. I thank our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Gwadi, for coming up with the idea of an annual academic freedom lecture. I thank the Deputy Vice-Chancellors, Professor Robert and Professor Franz. That's the way we call our professors here by the first name. When I came to South Africa, I was at first very much irritated, but that's the way we do it, and in a certain sense, it is also quite cute. And above all, I should, of course, thank our speaker, Dr. Seibold Noorda, whom I even had to disturb during his holiday in the Swiss Alps. But I'm very thankful for you coming here. If this would have been a live event, I would have had a concrete present for you. So this must wait for another time, but I have arranged that with the law faculty and actually the university. It is, on the one hand, nice scarf, and on the other hand, we also have a nice tie. In university, university color is purple, faculty color is red, and because this is an African institution, our colors are so intense, you won't find them in Europe. Thank you again, Seibold, for being here. Clapping hands. Usually we would have heard a very loud clap of hands now. And I see Prof. Robert is on screen. I'm sure Prof. Robert has a final word to say.
Yes, sorry about I lost the link for a minute, but Dr. Noorda, thank you. I can only echo Klaus's sentiments, but also thank you to our audience, to everybody who's attended and participated. I read with interest all the comments and the questions in the Q&A, as well as from the participants. So I want to express my appreciation to you, Klaus, and to the Faculty of Law and our panelists for leading us into this discussion with Sybald today. It's all very, very appreciated and was a really great event to attend. So on behalf of the university and our leadership and our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Noorde, great appreciation for making time for us this afternoon. Thanks.